They buried my life's work in dirt. 6,000 tons of it. And then they tried to send me the bill. My name's Caleb Mercer. I'm 54 years old, licensed blasting contractor, third-generation stone man. And until about a year ago, I thought I had seen every kind of stubborn this world could throw at me. Turns out I hadn't met suburban stubborn yet. I own an 8-acre limestone quarry about 20 minutes outside of Blackridge, Tennessee. Not some abandoned pit with a rusted fence and a couple beer cans rolling around in it. A real, state-permitted, inspected, bonded commercial mineral site. I spent 14 years cutting that hole into the earth, bench by bench, blasting and measured charges, hauling out overburdened by the truckload, chasing one particular layer of blue vein limestone that only shows up in pockets through this part of the state. That bluestone runs about $360 a ton when the market's good. Architectural grade. High compression strength. Gorgeous when it's cut and polished. It's the kind of rock that ends up in courthouse steps and custom fireplaces and those fancy outdoor kitchens people show off on Instagram. I didn't inherit that layer. I earned it. Every foot down cost sweat, diesel, and more than one sleepless night staring at loan statements. Last spring, I took a 5-week contract up in Kentucky, blasting for a highway expansion job. Good money, union scale, the kind of gig you don't turn down when you're self-employed. Before I left, I walked the rim of my quarry like I always do, checked the pumps, covered the exposed blue seam with tarps in case of heavy rain, locked the gate, and headed north thinking everything back home was solid. When I drove back in late May, the first thing I noticed was the dust. Not the fine gray powder you expect around a quarry, but this reddish-brown clay hanging in the air like someone had been tearing up farmland. I slowed my truck, rolled down the window, and my stomach just dropped. Where there should have been a 40-foot drop into clean-cut stone benches, there was flat ground. Lumpy, uneven, fresh dirt stretching across the entire mouth of the pit. For a second, I honestly thought I had taken a wrong turn. I got out, boots crunching over gravel that wasn't mine, and walked toward the edge. Only there wasn't an edge anymore. They had filled it. Dumped construction debris, tree stumps, broken concrete, rebar, chunks of asphalt, and truckload after truckload of filled dirt straight into my quarry until it was level with the surrounding grade. I just stood there, hands on my hips, heart pounding in my ears. 14 years of work, buried like it was a trash can. I remember laughing. Not because it was funny, but because sometimes your brain refuses to process what your eyes are telling you. I actually said out loud, "Well, that ain't right." The gate lock had been cut. Tire tracks everywhere. I walked the perimeter and counted at least a dozen different tread patterns. Somebody had been busy. I drove straight to the county clerk's office the next morning. Construction debris that size has to be logged somewhere, even if it's private fill. I've been in this business long enough to know paper trails are like footprints in wet cement. Sure enough, after an hour of flipping through disposal records and site transfer permits, I found it. 39 dump tickets over 3 weeks. All listed under West Haven Estates Homeowners Association. West Haven Estates sits on the ridge just east of my property. 150-something houses, manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, little American flags on every porch. They built that subdivision about 6 years ago, after I already had my quarry operating under a state license. I remember going to one of their early town halls, trying to be neighborly, explaining blasting schedules, showing them vibration studies, telling them when we'd be running heavy equipment. Most folks nodded. A few didn't. The HOA president at the time was a man named Douglas Harlan. Mid-40s, pressed polo shirts, always carried himself like he was addressing a board meeting even when he was ordering coffee. We'd butted heads before over noise complaints, though every blast I set was within state decibel and vibration limits. I called the number listed for West Haven's management office. A woman answered, bright and polite. I asked for Mr. Harlan. He picked up after a minute, voice smooth as ever. Douglas speaking. "Doug," I said, trying to keep my tone level. "This is Caleb Mercer. I just got back into town. You want to explain why there's half your neighborhood sitting in my quarry?" Silence. Just a faint exhale. "Caleb," he said finally, "we've been meaning to speak with you. Your pit has become a serious safety concern." "My pit?" I repeated, looking out at the mountain of dirt that used to be my blue seam. "Yes." Several residents reported that children were able to access the perimeter. Property values were being affected. We commissioned an environmental review and were advised that the safest course of action was to stabilize the area by dumping 39 truckloads of trash into it. I asked. It was fill material, he corrected calmly. And frankly, we did you a favor. That open excavation was a liability. I felt my jaw tighten. That excavation is a licensed mineral site. You can't just. Permits don't supersede community welfare, Caleb, he cut in. If your operation threatens our families, we will act. Then he said the part that still makes my ears burn. We'll be sending you an invoice for $34,000 to cover the cost of the fill and the environmental assessment. It's only fair. I laughed again, but this time there was no disbelief in it. Just something darker. Doug, I said quietly, you just buried about 2,000 tons of exposed blue limestone that I had under contract. You didn't do me a favor. You picked a fight. He sighed like I was being unreasonable. The pit is filled. It's done. Sometimes it's best to move on. I hung up without another word. That afternoon, I walked the site again, this time slower, noticing the way broken cinder blocks had gouged into the top bench, the way clay had seeped down into the fractures of the stone. I thought about the 3 contracts I had lined up, about the masons waiting on shipments, about the deposits already spent on equipment payments. 19 days. That's how long it took for my buyers to start calling, asking where their stone was. One hinted at breach of contract. Another said if I couldn't deliver by the end of the month, they'd have to source elsewhere. And just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, I got a certified letter from the county zoning board. West Haven Estates had filed a formal complaint alleging I was operating an illegal excavation without proper authorization. I sat at my kitchen table that night, letter spread out in front of me, hands stained with red clay that wouldn't wash off. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to fear, not of losing the quarry, but of losing the ground beneath my own name. And that's when I pulled out a document I hadn't looked at in years. My mineral rights deed. I keep my mineral deed in a fireproof box in the back of my closet, tucked behind old tax returns and my father's pocket watch. It's not the kind of document you frame on a wall, but it might as well be a family portrait. Dated 1963. Signed in fountain pen. It states, in very plain language, that the subsurface mineral rights to my 8 acres belong to the Mercer family to a depth of 400 feet, with full protection from surface interference under Tennessee mining law. My grandfather bought those rights when this land was nothing but timber and scrub. He didn't have much, but he understood one thing real well, which was that rock doesn't care about politics. It just sits there waiting for somebody patient enough to earn it. I read that deed 3 times that night, slow, line by line, like I was looking for cracks in it. There weren't any. The next morning I drove to Nashville and sat down with a mining attorney named Laura Bennett. Late 30s, sharp eyes, boots under her desk instead of heels. I slid the deed across to her and told her what happened. She didn't interrupt me once. Just listened, fingers steepled, and when I finished she leaned back and said, "They filled an active permitted quarry?" "Sure did. Without your consent. Didn't even leave a note." She gave a low whistle. "That's not a zoning dispute, Caleb. That's interference with mineral extraction. If it's willful, the statute allows for treble damages." "Treble," I repeated. "Triple," she said plainly. "And if the limestone was contaminated by their debris, that's destruction of resource." For the first time since I'd gotten home, I felt something other than anger. I felt steady. We filed a formal complaint with the Tennessee Board of Mineral Resources that afternoon. Included photos, dump records, copies of my permits, vibration reports from the last 5 years, even emails from early meetings with West Haven where I'd outlined blasting schedules and offered to build additional fencing at shared boundaries. 2 days later, I got a call from a state inspector named Raymond Cole. Gravel voice, sounded like he'd been breathing quarry dust his whole life. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "I'll be out there Thursday morning. Don't touch a thing." I didn't. Thursday came hot and bright. I was standing at the gate when a white state truck rolled up, followed by another vehicle carrying 2 surveyors. Raymond stepped out, sunglasses, clipboard, no nonsense. He walked the site in silence for nearly an hour, dug his boot into the fill, picked up chunks of concrete, took coarse samples from the buried seam where it was still accessible along the west wall. Finally, he turned to me and said, "This was active." "Yes, sir." "Permits are current." "Yes, sir." He nodded once. "Then this is going to be a problem for your neighbors." That afternoon, he drove straight up to West Haven's clubhouse. I didn't go. I just watched from the road as he and the surveyors disappeared inside. Word travels fast in a subdivision. By evening, my phone was buzzing with numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't answer. The official order came the next day. West Haven Estates HOA was required to remove all foreign fill material from my quarry within 30 days at their own expense. Failure to comply would result in state-contracted removal with full cost recovery plus penalties. And then came the line that mattered most. The mineral estate holds dominant rights over the surface estate in matters of lawful extraction. In plain English, my rock outshrank their lawns. Doug Harlan called that night. He didn't sound smooth anymore. You blindsided us, he said, voice tight. I blindsided you. I asked, honestly impressed. You went to the state without attempting mediation. You filled my quarry without attempting common sense. There was a pause, and then his tone shifted from defensive to irritated. Do you have any idea what this is going to cost our residents? I have a real good idea what it cost me, I said. He lowered his voice. Look, maybe we overreacted. But you have to understand the position we were in. Kids were sneaking down there. Parents were scared. Property values matter. So does private property, I said quietly. The removal started a week later. State-approved contractors, big yellow excavators, dump trucks lining up like ants. They hauled out load after load of what they had dumped in. It took 11 days just to reach the top of my blue seam again. That's when the second blow landed. The core samples came back from the lab. Contaminated. Clay infiltration deep into the fractures. Petroleum traces from asphalt chunks. Fine particulate from crushed drywall embedded in the upper layers. Raymond called me personally. 2,400 tons are compromised, he said. You can't sell that as architectural grade anymore. I did the math in my head. $360 a ton. $864,000. Just gone. Laura filed the damage claim that same afternoon. Destruction of mineral resource. Loss of contracted revenue. Cost of excavation and site restoration. Operational downtime. Professional assessment fees. West Haven's legal team tried to argue they believed the quarry was inactive. We produced inspection logs from the month before I left for Kentucky. They argued community safety. We produced fencing invoices and security camera footage showing no trespass incidents. They argued environmental risk. We produced state compliance certificates. Every time they shifted, the ground moved under them. And here's the thing most folks don't understand about HOAs. They operate with confidence because usually they're dealing with paint colors and mailbox heights. When you drag them into statutory mineral law, it's like watching someone bring a butter knife to a gunfight. The numbers kept climbing. 864,000 in destroyed limestone. 900,000 in lost contracts. 350,000 in excavation costs. 100,000 in assessment and lab work. 130,000 in downtime. Over $2.3 million before multipliers. Laura explained treble damages to me again, slower this time. If the court determines their interference was willful, she said, meaning they knew you were active and acted anyway, the award can be tripled. Willful, I repeated. She slid a printed email across her desk. It was from Doug to the HOA board, dated 3 weeks before the first dump load. Caleb Mercer will be out of town for a month. This may be our window to resolve the quarry issue decisively. I just stared at it. They hadn't misunderstood. They'd waited. The hearing lasted 34 days from filing to final judgment. I didn't speak much in court. Didn't need to. The documents did that for me. When the judge read the final figure, there was an audible sound from the gallery. Not a gasp exactly. More like the air leaving a room. $6.9 million, payable within 90 days. Doug didn't look at me. And for a moment, sitting there in that wood-paneled courtroom, I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. Like I had just watched 2 trains collide in slow motion and couldn't decide who had stepped onto the tracks first. But it wasn't over. Because money on paper and money in hand are 2 very different things. A judgment is just ink until somebody writes the check. That's something my father used to say when a contractor swore he'd settle up next week. Paper promises don't move stone. Money does. West Haven Estates had 90 days. The first 30 were loud. Residents packed their clubhouse every evening, from what I heard. Emergency board meetings. Heated arguments. People who had never paid attention to HOA politics suddenly reading bylaws like scripture. I'd see posts pop up on the local Facebook group. Neighbors asking what treble damages meant, whether insurance would cover it, whether this was some kind of mistake. It wasn't. By day 45, it got quiet. That's when the letters went out to homeowners. A special assessment was being considered. Tens of thousands per household if they wanted to satisfy the judgment and keep the association intact. Some families had bought in at the edge of their budget because West Haven promised stability, rising property values, community standards. Now those standards had a price tag. I didn't celebrate. I didn't drive past slowly or stand at my fence like some villain twirling a mustache. I went back to work. The removal had finished. The contaminated layer was cut out and hauled off to a lower-grade aggregate buyer for pennies on the dollar. Watching that blue stone loaded up and sold as road base hurt more than I expected. That seam had taken 14 years to reach. It deserved better than being crushed under tires. But rock doesn't hold grudges. It just waits for the next charge. Around day 60, I got word that West Haven's insurance carrier had officially denied coverage. Mining-related claims excluded. Intentional acts excluded. That email Doug wrote about waiting for my window out of town? That was the nail in the coffin. By day 75, the board voted to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. When the news broke, I was greasing fittings on my excavator. My phone buzzed with a text from Laura. It's filed. I sat there on the step of that machine for a long time, grease on my hands, staring at the quarry floor below. The walls looked clean again. The benches sharp. Floodlights installed for extended shifts. We'd be running 24 hours for a while to make up lost ground. Bankruptcy dissolved the HOA. Assets liquidated. The judgment still stood, but recovery would come in pieces through the court-appointed trustee. The clubhouse. The reserve fund. Any unencumbered property. Doug Harlan filed personal bankruptcy 2 weeks later. I heard he lost his house. I wish I could tell you I felt satisfaction. Maybe a little. I'm human. But mostly I felt the weight of what had happened. One decision made in a boardroom, framed as protecting families, had rippled outward and knocked down an entire neighborhood structure. And here's the complicated part. Were there kids who wandered near my fence? Probably. Did blasting rattle a few windows once in a while? Sure did. Did I like the idea of somebody getting hurt on my land? Not for a second. But there's a difference between addressing a concern and deciding you have the authority to erase someone else's livelihood. Doug wasn't a cartoon villain. He was a man who believed control equaled safety. He built his reputation in that subdivision on being decisive, on handling issues. I think when residents complained about the quarry, he saw an opportunity to be the hero. Fill the pit. Solve the problem. Boost property values. He just never considered that the ground under his feet wasn't his to command. 11 weeks after I came home to a field of dirt, I stood at the bottom of my quarry again, looking up at the night sky. Floodlights hummed. Generators rattled. My crew moved like shadows along the benches, setting charges, checking lines. I gave the signal. The blast rolled through the earth, a deep, controlled thud that echoed off the walls and up toward the ridge where West Haven's houses sat in neat rows. I imagined curtains shifting, maybe a few people pausing mid-conversation. This time, though, there were no complaints filed. No emergency meetings. No HOA letterhead. Just the sound of lawful work being done. We extracted the remaining blue seam over the next year. Market held steady. About $2.4 million in stone came out clean. Contracts fulfilled. New ones signed. I paid off equipment notes I'd been carrying longer than I wanted to admit. One evening, months later, I ran into an older couple from West Haven at the hardware store. They recognized me before I did them. The husband cleared his throat and said, "You're the quarry man." "Yes, sir." He shifted his weight. "We voted against the fill, you know." Didn't matter. Board said it was already arranged. His wife added quietly, "It got out of hand." I nodded. It usually does when folks stop asking who actually owns what. We stood there awkwardly for a second, surrounded by bags of concrete mix and garden hoses, and then he surprised me. "For what it's worth," he said, "you were within your rights." That meant more than the judgment ever did. Because here's what I've learned. Power feels real when it's written in bylaws and printed on glossy neighborhood newsletters. But actual ownership, the kind etched into deeds and backed by law, that's a different animal. If Doug had called me before the first truck rolled in, we could have talked. I might have reinforced fencing, added signage, scheduled blasts differently. I'm not unreasonable. But he didn't want compromise. He wanted resolution on his terms. And in trying to bury my quarry, He ended up burying his own authority. People still ask me if I think the damages were too high, if 6.9 million was excessive, if I could have settled cheaper and spared the neighborhood. Maybe. But here's the question I wrestle with. If someone walks onto your land, destroys nearly $1 million of your product, costs you contracts, drags your name through a legal complaint, and does it intentionally because they believe they know better, what's the right price for that lesson? I don't know. I do know this. Every time I walk the rim of that quarry now, I run my hand along the fence line. I check the locks twice. Not because I'm afraid. Because I understand something I didn't before. Conflict doesn't start with explosions. It starts with assumptions. So I'm asking you, if you lived in that subdivision, would you have supported filling the pit? Would you have fought the board? Or would you have trusted that the HOA knew best? And if you were in my boots, staring at 6,000 tons of someone else's decision piled on top of your life's work, would you have pushed for every dollar the law allowed? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more than you think. Because this wasn't just about rock. It was about boundaries, pride, and what happens when one community decides it can redraw someone else's line. And trust me, lines in stone don't move easy.